My name is Victoria, and there was a time when my dreams made people laugh behind my back or sometimes, right to my face. They thought I was naive, unrealistic, or just too ordinary to ever make something big happen. But what they didn't see was my stubborn heart, my late nights, and the fire that burned quietly inside me. Today, the same people who mocked me come to me for guidance. This is my story of transformation, courage, and quiet revenge served in the sweetest way possible. I still remember the first time someone truly laughed at my dreams. It wasn't a loud, cruel laugh, more like a quick giggle, as though what I'd said was too silly to be taken seriously. I was 18, sitting in a small cafe on a cold winter evening, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea to keep warm. Across the table sat my oldest friend, Hannah, someone I'd known since childhood. My heart was beating fast because I had decided to share my biggest dream with her. I wanted to build my own design brand. I want to start small, I explained nervously. Maybe begin with local markets, sell my own design stationery prints, maybe even fabric patterns, and someday, have my products in real shops. Hannah smiled, but not the way I had hoped. Instead of encouragement, her eyes sparkled with amusement. She let out a tiny laugh and shook her head. "Oh, come on, Victoria," she said softly. "That's adorable. But be real. How would you even do that? It's just not really you." She didn't mean it to be mean. I could tell, but her words pierced through me, cutting deeper than she could have known. I forced a smile, nodded, and pretended to laugh along. But something shifted inside me that evening. I walked home, under gray skies, the cold wind biting my cheeks, thinking about what she'd said. Not really you, why not me? I wasn't sure if I felt angrier at Hannah for doubting me, or at myself for not being brave enough to defend my dream. The laughter behind polite smiles, it wasn't just Hannah. Over the next few years, every time I dared to speak my dream aloud, the reaction was almost always the same. A polite smile, a nervous laugh, or a gentle reminder to think realistically. Even my family, who loved me deeply, couldn't quite see what I saw. My dad once said, kindly but firmly, "It's good to dream, Vic, but maybe keep your feet on the ground." My mom was softer. She'd say, "Just don't get your hopes too high, darling. I'd hate to see you hurt." At first, it felt like the world was gently placing a hand on my shoulder and asking me to slow down. But slowly, it turned into something else. Friends would share stories of people who failed at starting businesses. My cousins would brag about their secure jobs, hinting that my ideas were childish daydreams. At gatherings, when someone asked what I wanted to do with my life, I noticed the way eyes darted away, or the forced, "Oh, that's interesting," they'd offered before changing the topic. It was humiliating in a quiet, suffocating way. I wasn't being openly bullied or yelled at. Instead, I felt like everyone had silently decided my dreams were a sweet but foolish fantasy. The worst part was, a small voice in my head began to agree with them. The loneliness of dreaming, there's a special kind of loneliness that comes when your dreams feel invisible to the people you love most. I remember nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if I really was being naive. Maybe I was just an ordinary girl from a small town. What made me think I could do something bigger? I still drew designs late at night, sketching patterns in cheap notebooks. But I stopped telling people about them. It hurt too much to see the polite indifference in their eyes. Instead, I carried my dreams quietly, like a secret folded in my heart. There were moments I almost gave up completely. One day, after hearing my uncle talk proudly about his daughter's promotion at a law firm, I went home and cried in the bathroom for over an hour. I thought about deleting my design files, throwing away my sketchbooks, and trying to become someone more acceptable, someone who fit into the world's safe boxes. But every time I got close to letting go, something deep inside refused. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was simply the fact that drawing and creating made me feel alive in a way nothing else ever had. When doubt became part of my reflection, the doubt wasn't just coming from outside. It began to grow inside me too. I started hearing other people's voices in my own head. It's just a silly hobby. You'll embarrass yourself. Who do you think you are? Even when I tried to encourage myself, these voices were louder. I'd stand in front of the mirror, whispering, "You can do this," but the reflection looked unconvinced. It was strange how powerful words can be, even when softly spoken. They settle in your bones, shaping how you see yourself. At college, it got worse. I studied graphic design, and while I loved the work, I felt painfully ordinary compared to others. Some students were naturally talented, while I struggled for every good piece. Once, during a group critique, a classmate dismissed my work as kind of basic. I nodded silently, went home, and cried on my bedroom floor. Each insult, no matter how small, felt like confirmation that maybe everyone else had been right all along. Silent witnesses to my struggle. My family saw pieces of my struggle, though they didn't always understand. My mom would knock gently on my door at night and ask if I was okay. I'd smile, say I was fine, and hide my tears until she left. My dad would ask how college was going, and I'd give short answers, afraid he'd see the cracks in my confidence. Friends noticed too, but they had their own lives, their own dreams, and their own doubts. Some drifted away naturally, and I didn't chase them. It hurt, but it felt easier than trying to explain why I couldn't just focus on something practical. Sometimes, I blamed them for not believing in me, but most nights, I blamed myself for not being strong enough to silence the doubt. Secret acts of courage even when everyone doubted me. There were small, secret acts of courage that kept me going. I applied for small design competitions, even though I never told anyone. I stayed up until dawn teaching myself how to use design software better. I read books about business, branding, and creativity, even if I hid them under my bed so no one would see. These little steps didn't feel brave at the time. They felt desperate, like I was clinging to a thin thread that kept me connected to my dream. But looking back, I see them as moments of quiet rebellion against the laughter and doubt around me. The pain that turned into fuel. Every laugh, every dismissive comment, every raised eyebrow, they hurt deeply. But strangely, they also built a fire inside me. I'd think about Hannah's laugh, about my cousin's smirk, about that classmate's insult, and feel a spark of anger. "I'll show them," I'd whisper to myself in the dark. That anger wasn't loud or dramatic. It lived quietly, fueling my late nights and early mornings. It pushed me to try again after every failure, to draw another design after every criticism. It wasn't healthy all the time. Sometimes it made me bitter and exhausted, but it also made me unstoppable, even when no one else could see it. The day I stopped asking for permission, there was a day that changed everything, not because the world changed, but because I did. I was 22, fresh out of university, working part-time at a bookstore to pay rent. One quiet afternoon, I caught myself staring at the shelves, daydreaming again about my own designs being sold somewhere like this. Then, suddenly, I realized I was waiting for permission, for approval, for someone to say, "Now you can try." I walked home that evening, heart pounding, and thought, what if no one ever gives me permission? What if I have to give it to myself? That night, I opened my laptop, designed 3 simple prints, and set up a tiny online shop. I didn't tell anyone. I just did it. No one bought anything for weeks. But I didn't stop, because for the first time, I wasn't asking anyone if it was okay to dream. I was just doing it. Rejection and small victories. A journey after that was messy. I faced rejection emails from local shops, low sales, and moments of crushing doubt. Sometimes I'd sit on the floor surrounded by unsold prints, crying silently so my flatmate wouldn't hear. But every small victory felt huge. The first stranger who bought something. The first 5-star review. The first time someone messaged to say they loved my work. They were tiny moments, but they were proof. Someone, somewhere, saw value in what I made. That was enough to keep going. Quiet growth, unseen by those who laughed, while the people who once laughed at my dreams moved on with their lives. I kept working quietly. My shop started making enough to cover small bills. Then, slowly, it grew. I reinvested every penny, learned about marketing, built a brand identity, and kept designing new products at family gatherings. When someone asked what I was doing now, I'd say, still working on my design brand. And they'd nod politely, still not really believing it would go anywhere. I didn't correct them or try to convince them anymore. I realized it wasn't my job to prove my worth with words. I would prove it with action. The slow turning of tides. It took years, painful, uncertain, lonely years, but the tide slowly began to turn. People who once doubted me started asking questions. So how's your little business going? Their voices still had traces of doubt, but curiosity had replaced laughter. One day, Hannah messaged me, "Hey, I saw your designs on Instagram, they're beautiful. How did you even get started?" It felt surreal, like the world had flipped upside down. The same person who once laughed at my dream now wanted to learn from it. What I learned from being underestimated, being laughed at, taught me things no classroom ever could. I learned that sometimes people don't believe in your dreams because they can't see them the way you do on. That's okay. I learned that you can survive heartbreak, embarrassment, and doubt, and still keep going. I learned that your loudest critic often lives inside your own head, and silencing her is a lifelong battle. Most importantly, I learned that the people who laugh at your dreams aren't always cruel. Sometimes they're just limited by their own fears. Forgiving them and forgiving myself for ever believing them was part of growing up, a promise to my younger self. If I could speak to the 18-year-old girl sitting in that cafe, I'd tell her this: they will laugh, you will cry, you will doubt yourself more times than you can count, but keep going. Because one day, those same people will look at you differently, not as a joke, but as proof that courage can turn dreams into reality. And that moment, when laughter turns into respect, will make every tear and sleepless night worth it. The day I stopped asking for permission was the day something inside me changed forever. Until then, every laugh, every doubt, and every rejection had felt like a wound, painful, raw, and personal. But slowly, almost without realizing it, I began to turn that pain into something else: fuel. It wasn't quick or pretty. It wasn't the kind of transformation you see in films, where a single moment makes everything clear. Mine was quieter, slower, and at times, it hurt just as much as before. But step by step, the pain that had once threatened to break me became the very thing that built me. A private promise. One night, after another family dinner where my dreams were gently dismissed, I walked back to my small flat feeling emptier than I had in years. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor for what felt like hours. Then, in a whisper only I could hear, I made myself a promise: I will keep going, not because they believe in me, but because I have to believe in myself. It sounds simple now, but back then, it was the bravest thing I had ever done. I had spent so long waiting for encouragement from the outside that I'd forgotten the strongest encouragement could come from within. That night, I wrote in my journal, "They can laugh all they want. I will keep going until they have nothing left to laugh at." The power of small steps. After that promise, nothing changed overnight. I still doubted myself, still felt the sting of criticism, and still cried sometimes when things went wrong. But the difference was, I didn't let those feelings decide what I did next. Instead, I focused on small steps. Every evening after work, I dedicated at least an hour to my designs, no matter how tired I felt. Some nights I barely managed 15 minutes, but I refused to let a day go by without doing something. It wasn't always creative. Sometimes it was researching suppliers, learning about social media marketing, or sketching ideas that might never be finished. The point was to keep the momentum alive. Each small step felt insignificant in the moment, but looking back, they were the bricks that built the foundation of everything that followed. I realized that big dreams are built from hundreds, maybe thousands, of small, often invisible actions. Learning to work with doubt never truly left me. Even as my shop grew, there were mornings when I woke up thinking, "Who do you think you are, Victoria?" But instead of trying to fight doubt, I learned to work with it. Whenever I felt overwhelmed by fear, I'd ask myself, what is one tiny thing I can do today? Maybe it was posting one design online, emailing one shop about stocking my work, or simply organizing my workspace. Even on my worst days, I could do something small, and those small things added up over months and years. It felt like training a stubborn dog. Doubt would bark and pull at the leash, but I kept walking forward anyway. Finding strength in rejection. Rejection was my constant companion. The first time a local shop declined to stock my prints, I cried all the way home, convinced I'd never succeed. But over time, rejection started to hurt differently. Instead of seeing it as proof I wasn't good enough, I began to see it as a sign I was trying. The more I reached out to shops, markets, and online platforms, the more I heard no. But occasionally, I heard maybe, and sometimes, I even heard yes. Each yes felt like a small miracle, but each no taught me resilience. I kept a spreadsheet of every rejection, not to punish myself, but to remind myself how many times I'd dared to ask. It became a quiet badge of honor, proof that I was still in the game, even when it was hard. The late-night work. Most of my turning points didn't happen during the day. They happened late at night, when the world felt quiet and my fear softened its grip. It was in those hours that I allowed myself to imagine freely, without worrying what anyone would think. I designed new prints under the soft yellow glow of my desk lamp, drank endless cups of tea, and lost track of time sketching patterns that felt truest to me. Sometimes, I'd look out the window and see lights on in other flats, and I'd wonder if someone else was chasing their own quiet dream too. Those nights didn't just produce designs, they healed me. They reminded me why I started, long before anyone laughed or doubted. Embracing imperfection. For a long time, I thought everything I created had to be perfect before sharing it. That belief kept me frozen, staring at unfinished designs, too scared to let them see daylight. But slowly, I learned that imperfection was not my enemy. It was my teacher. I started posting designs online even when they felt unfinished. I shared behind-the-scenes photos, messy sketches, and stories of failed ideas. To my surprise, people responded not to perfection, but to honesty. They liked seeing the process, the flaws, and the humanity behind the work. Sharing imperfectly taught me that vulnerability could be land, that my worth wasn't tied to flawless outcomes. Building discipline, not waiting for motivation. Motivation is wonderful when it comes, but I learned it's as unreliable as the weather. Discipline, however, could be built like a muscle. At first it was painful. There were days I wanted nothing more than to watch TV and forget about my dreams. But I kept my promise to myself, at least 1 hour a day, no matter how I felt. Some days were creative breakthroughs, others were boring, frustrating, or exhausting. But by showing up every day, I proved to myself that I could be trusted to keep going even when it was hard. A small but real turning point. About a year into running my online shop, I got an email that made my heart stop. A small independent shop in London wanted to stock my prints. It wasn't a huge chain or a big order, just 20 pieces to start. But it felt like a door opening. When I delivered the prints in person, I remember standing outside the shop afterward, staring at my reflection in the window. For the first time, I saw someone who wasn't just dreaming, she was doing. It was a quiet victory. No applause, no cameras, no big announcement. But it meant everything to me. Turning criticism into questions. People still criticized my work. Online comments, market customers, even casual remarks from friends. At first, these comments felt like daggers. But over time, I learned to treat them differently. Instead of taking criticism as a verdict, I treated it as a question. Why didn't this design connect? What can I learn from this? Not all criticism was useful. Some came from people who didn't understand my style or my audience, but asking questions turned painful words into opportunities for growth. Redefining success. In the beginning, success meant proving everyone wrong, becoming wildly famous, and making enough money to silence all doubt forever. But as I worked, my definition changed. Success became quieter, loving the work I did, paying my bills through creativity, hearing from someone that my designs made their day brighter. The laughter from others no longer determined my worth. My own sense of purpose did. community, not competition at first. I saw every other designer as competition, but isolation made me miserable, so I started connecting with other creatives online. To my surprise, many of them had faced similar doubts and laughter. We shared stories, encouraged each other, and sometimes even collaborated. Their kindness reminded me that dreams don't need to be lonely. Finding people who understood didn't erase the past pain, but it eased the loneliness that came with it. The emotional breakthrough one night. Exhausted after a long market day where I sold very little, I sat in my flat and finally let myself feel everything. The disappointment, the hurt, the fear. I cried until there were no tears left. Then something surprising happened. After the crying, I felt lighter, not because the problems were gone, but because I had stopped fighting my feelings. Instead of pretending to be fearless, I accepted that fear was part of the journey. That acceptance freed me. I didn't need to be fearless to keep going. I just needed to keep going with the fear. Finding my voice over time, my designs changed. They became bolder, more colorful, and more personal. I stopped trying to guess what people wanted and started creating what felt true to me. Ironically, that authenticity attracted more customers. People could sense when something was honest, and they valued it. Finding my creative voice wasn't a single moment, it was a series of small decisions. To trust my instincts over other people's expectations. The quiet revenge. Used to dream about dramatic revenge. A big moment when everyone who laughed at me would see my success and regret doubting me. But real life was quieter. The same people who laughed started asking questions, seeking advice, and complimenting my work.